you. So reducing youth unemployment, we will discuss two papers. The first one is actually a working paper from IMF. And then the second one, we have one more paper that evaluate the policy of giving vocational training to the at-risk youth population, okay? So this is the first paper. It's actually still work in progress, youth labor markets in emerging market and developing economies. You can find this in IMF website. I think I will also upload the paper in semester after this. So, okay, first one, the introduction. So economic development and growth depends on countries' young people. Why? Because young people, they are in the productive age. So we expect them to be able to increase the GDP, because they will join the labor market. And then with most of their working life ahead of them, they make up about a third of the working age population in the typical emerging market and developing economy. So in most developing countries, the young people, they are made up of a third of the working age population. So in the working age population, we have adult, we have also a youth. Okay, the youth is a third of the working age population. That is a very typical in emerging market in developing economy. But the youth in these economies face a daunting labor market. About 20% of them are neither employed in school nor in training. So out of those youth, 20% of them, they are not employed, they are not in school, and they are not in training. We call this as inactivity rate. So the inactivity rate among the youth in the labor market is actually quite high. It's 20%, yeah. This is double the share of the average advanced economy. Meanwhile, in the advanced economy, it's only the inactivity rate is only about 10%, because in the emerging market, it's doubled. Were nothing else to change, bringing youth inactivity in these economies down to what it is in advanced economic, and getting those inactive young people into new jobs would have striking effect. So this is the goal, okay, of the policy that we're going to discuss here. We want those young people that are inactive because they are neither employed in school or in training. We want them to get jobs, okay, as soon as possible, and it will have a striking effect in the economy. The working age employment rate in the average emerging market and developing economy would rise more than 3 percentage points, and real output would get 5% boost. So if we can do this, we can make them employed, then the projection is going to raise more than 3 percentage points in terms of, wait a minute, in terms of the growth, I think here, and then real output would get 5% boost in here. So that's the projection from IMF, yeah. Okay, let's take a look deeper in the youth unemployment problem. So the first one here, we can see that about 20% of the young people on the average emerging market and developing economy are neither in school nor employed. So they are not in school and they are not employed. And you can see here in this figure, this is cross-country distribution for young share of working age population. So you see the EMDE here, this is the emerging market and developing economy, and the AE here, this is advanced economy. And you can see that the young share of the working age population is higher in the emerging market compared to the advanced economy, okay? And then if you take a look at the youth inactivity rate, it is also higher in the emerging market than in the advanced economy. Okay, the youth here defined as someone who is 15 to 24 years. Meanwhile, working age is between 15 and 64 years. The middle line is the median of the distribution, and the upper bound is the 25th and 75th percent respectively. Okay. So the youth unemployment is about 18% in these economies on average. So on average, the youth unemployment in emerging economies is about 18%. And together with the youth inactivity rate, this translates about 12%. Meanwhile, the inactivity rate is 12% of young people who are unoccupied. So that's the first problem with the emerging market. We have quite high youth inactivity rate. Okay. Okay, and then the next slide. And then the second problem is regarding migration. Okay, international migration driven by both pull and push factors is at the same time changing working age population in source and destination countries. So because some people are migrating, and those people who are migrating, they are in the working age, especially youth. So if those people are gone from the country, it means that the working age population proportion is now going to change. Okay. About 20% of international migrants are young, and their desire to migrate is closely related to the country's level of economic development and opportunities for youth employment. So this is interesting. So if in a country there is this young people and they consider it is hard to get a good job in their country, so they're going to migrate to other countries where they think it's going to be easier for them to get job. And those young people who do international migration, there are about 20% of the whole international migration. So the most capable young people are often most likely to move. So among those young people who are inactive, the most capable of them, they are most likely to move to a better economy or to a better country. Economic policy must be strengthened to encourage them to stay, though improve opportunities for learning and for those out of school, productive employment, all in an environment that is safe, secure, and youth-friendly. So what should the government do that those people are willing to stay in their country? Well, the economic policy must encourage them to stay and improve the opportunities for learning, and then productive employment, and safe and secure environment for the youth. Okay, because otherwise the youth is going to move someplace else, and if the youth is going to move someplace else, then the working age population is going to be reduced, yeah, in the developing economy or in the emerging market. Okay, so the third problem is we have discussed before is the high youth inactivity is associated with the lower levels of trust. So we're talking about trust here in the society. In the society where the inactivity rate of youth is high, it seems like it's going to result in the issue with trust. And of course, it will result in social problems. So you can see here in this figure, this is trust in society and youth labor markets. The x-axis is the youth inactivity rate, and the y-axis is the trust in others. So in place where the youth inactivity rate is high, like for example, in Yemen here, it seems like the trust rate is not very high. Meanwhile, in Norwegia, for example, this is Norwegia, the youth inactivity rate is quite low, and then the trust is quite high. Okay, and then in Armenia, where the youth inactivity rate is quite high, the trust is quite low. So they have inverse relationship, okay, based on this evidence. So when young people cannot engage in meaningful productive activity, it can hurt social stability. Why? Because young people are at risk, yeah. They're still young. They can do anything, given it's good or bad. If it's something that is bad, it have potential to ruin the social stability. Like for example, if they are engaged in 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 drugs business, that's going to be not good. In crimes, for example, or in other risky things, so that will threaten the social ability. And it is already been proven by some of this paper, by Rubel, by Urdel, by Fox, and by Filmer and Fox. Okay. And then the fourth problem, this related to, this is so small, yeah, sorry, I will zoom in for you. The next one, it's related to the early experience in labor market can profoundly affect job prospect later in life. Okay, so young people who enter labor market during a recession tend to have higher lifetime unemployment rate. So if you are a youth and then you enter the labor market during recession, then you will have the probability, you will have higher probability to have lifetime unemployment rate as much as 1 to 2 percentage points and persistently lower earnings and also potentially lower earnings. A low quality job early on can also affect later job prospect. So low quality job in the beginning, it will affect the later job in the future. So such harm to young people's prospect can undermine the broader economy for years to come. If that happens to the youth, then it's going to threaten the whole economy in the future. You can see here, this is the population projection, yeah. You can see that the youth, okay, like for example, the youth in East Asia, for example, they have a higher proportion compared to the other age group, and also in Latin America, and also in Middle East and North Africa, and also in South Asia, and also in, okay, let me see, in Sub-Saharan Africa. So these are developing countries, right? And the youth, the proportion of the youth is quite high compared to the other age group. If this youth, they get their first job during recession, then it's going to be risky for them. It's going to have higher risk for them to have unemployment later. And if their first job is lower paying job, they will also have potentially cannot get a very much better job than that. So the policy regarding employment is very important considering this factor. Yeah. So the government must be careful and consider the job market, because these young people, their early experience in the job market is going to affect their future. Okay. Here, I was trying looking for this. This is the emerging market and developing economy. Yeah, the youth proportion is high compared to the other age group. Meanwhile, in the advanced economy, the youth proportion is not the highest among those other age groups. Okay. So the share of the people born after 1990, it's you, right? People born after 1990, current and the future youth will make up nearly 2/3 of the average emerging market and developing economies working age population by 2030. That calls for prompt action now to enhance this worker opportunity, productivity, employment, and human capital development. Okay. Okay. So next, problem number 5, the note outlines some of the key labor market challenges facing young people in emerging market and developing economies, and looks at ways to address them, focusing on the role of broad structural policy, including product and labor market regulation. So there is market failure in the labor market. So there are some challenges in the labor market. And if we break down those challenges, we have at least 5 of these key challenges. The first one is the consistently higher unemployment and lower participation, even among those out of school. And then the second one is the gender gaps, persistent and large gender gaps in youth participation and inactivity. Okay. And then the third one is technology and job prospect. The fourth is highly informal employment. And the fifth is highly sensitivity of youth unemployment to demand condition. So if the demand is changing, then the youth unemployment will also change quite a lot, yeah, because it's sensitive. So can you imagine if recession suddenly come, like there is COVID-19, for example, and then we experience recession, and then the demand is going to fall, then what's going to happen in the youth unemployment is it's going to go higher because of the sensitivity rate of the youth employment. Okay, so these are the challenge in the labor market. How do we overcome this? Well, we need structural change in terms of policy, which is not easy, yeah, but we're going to discuss some of the structural policy in this session. Okay. And then the next problem, consistent with the positive relationship between youth and adult employment rate across emerging market and developing economies, the analysis suggests that policies to enhance labor market flexibility and improve job quality are associated with better youth outcomes while also helping adults. So, because we know that the youth and adult employment, they have a direct relationship, yeah, they have what is it in English? Yeah, direct ya, searah, quote unquote. They have a direct relationship between youth and adult employment. So if the analysis is going, based on a deeper analysis, what makes both youth and adult employment better is that the flexibility in labor market. So the flexibility in labor market, and then wait a minute, the analysis to enhance labor market flexibility. If there is a flexibility in the labor market, it will result in the better youth outcomes and also adult adult outcomes. That's what I mean. So this is the relationship between employment rates between youth and adult. This is for women, this is for men. And you see that both has positive slope, which means that they have direct relationship. Okay, this is the adult employment rate in the x-axis, and then in the y-axis we have youth employment rate. Okay, and this is the countries that are in here. I think the red one is the developing economies. Meanwhile, the blue one is the advanced economy, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, and they have a pretty similar pattern because both of them has a direct relationship between employment rates for youth and adult. In general, people are more likely to work and have formal job when labor and product market institutions are more flexible and open. Okay. So, okay, if the market is more flexible and open, then it's going to increase the employment both for youth and adult. Okay, so those are some of the problems that we face in terms of youth unemployment. And then the next one, there is also opportunities that we can take in overcoming this youth unemployment problem. The first one is we expanding productive opportunities. Okay, so youth labor force participation and employment rates have declined over 25 years in average emerging market and developing economy. Mostly because those young people, they are in school. So the participation of the youth in the labor market is declined because most of those young people, they are in school or they get more training or they go to higher degree. Like for example, they pursue master degree or they pursue vocational degree or certification degree or whatever it is. Because they are in school, now they cannot join the labor force. They cannot participate in the employment. Although it seems like, oh, okay, then is that a bad thing? Because now the number of young people who are not employed is higher. Well, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Why? Because increase in educational attainment will have prospect for these young people to better their economic opportunity over the long term. So that's the ideal scenario, yeah, because they go to school, they get more training. Hopefully in the future, they will be able to secure a better job. But nevertheless, stubbornly, high youth unemployment and inactivity point to a persistent lack of opportunities for productive employment and human capital investment. Okay. So only or just because some young people or most of young people, they get more training and they go to school, we cannot just let the policy let loose, yeah. We still need to consider how these young people who get more training, they can still join the labor market or they can still secure a job in the future. So even though the demand side or this youth, they go to get more training, the supply side must also be considered so that they can in the future hire these young people who are graduating from school or training. So if we take a look in this graphic, so this is the youth labor market performance in percentage. The red one here is the EMDE or the emerging market. The blue one here is the red one here is youth in emerging market. The blue one is working age in emerging market. And then the black one here is it's youth in the advanced economy. You can see that in terms of labor force participation rate, the working age, the adult employment, is high in here. Meanwhile, the youth, it's low in here, the red one here. And then the rate of youth labor force participation in terms of EMDE and AE is pretty much the same in here. But in terms of employment rate, the advanced economy is higher than the emerging markets. And then in terms of unemployment rate, the youth from the emerging market is highest among these three, yeah, and then followed by advanced economies youth, and then the adult working population in the emerging market. Meanwhile, in terms of youth inactivity rate, then the youth from the emerging market is higher than those from the advanced economy. Okay. Okay. And then the next one, youth labor market outcomes vary widely across emerging market and developing economies, indicating difference in the nature and urgency of policy change across countries. So because the outcomes of youth labor market is different, it also reflects the different approach in terms of policy, in those countries. Cross-country variation in employment captured by the difference between 75th and 25th percentiles is about twice as high for youth as for the broader working age population. So the spread or the interval between variation of the employment in youth is much more higher than in the working age population. Okay, and because this is cross country of emerging economies. Like for example, in Paraguay and Vietnam, youth employment exceed 50%, while in Saudi Arabia and South Africa, it's only 15%. So this is quite high difference, yeah. In Paraguay and Vietnam, 50% of the youth in the labor force are employed. Meanwhile, in Saudi Arabia and South Africa, it's only 15% or lower, okay? So maybe if we can look deeper into this, then we can find that the policy approach in Saudi Arabia and Paraguay is different. That's why in the labor market, we can also see different outcomes. So youth inactivity rates also exhibit widespread. The inactivity rates also varies among those emerging market. Like for example, in Senegal here, the inactivity rate is 35%. Meanwhile, in Poland and Thailand, it's below 15%. And behind the headline, employment and youth inactivity rates, school enrollments also varies. So other than youth employment, inactivity rates, school enrollment also varies. So in Sub-Saharan Africa, the median schooling rate is less than half what is in emerging Europe and Central Asia. Okay, so considering all of this difference between countries, if we can take into account how different approach in the policy for different countries, then maybe we can have opportunity to expand the productivity. Okay. And then the next issue is gender gaps. Let's address gender gaps in here. So large and persistent gender gaps in youth labor market outcomes explain much on the higher youth inactivity rates in emerging market and developing economies. So if you take a look in the inactivity rate in emerging market, then you will find that, wait a minute. Oh, this is the inactivity rate. Oh, sorry, yeah. It seems like the quality of the picture is not very good, but I hope you can still see this graph. So here, the youth gender gap for inactivity. So what do you see in here? So this histogram, this is male rate minus female rate, okay? And then you can see that this is the difference between inactivity from male and female in the advanced economy, in the emerging market, and this other group, I'm not sure. Let's take a look at only the advanced economy and the emerging market. This is higher in the emerging market. So the gender gap is higher in the emerging market than in the advanced economy. In terms of participation in the labor market, you can see a similar thing, yeah, between advanced economy and emerging market. It's higher in the emerging economy than the advanced economy. Okay, and then this is the dynamic of the youth gender gap due to impact participation. Let me explain to you regarding the impact of participation and then characteristic. So here, youth gender gaps in participation and inactivity at the country level can be broken into two components. So basically the gender gaps between youth unemployment here, there are two components of this. The first one is the difference in individual characteristic between young women and men, such as marital status, having children, educational attainment, and so on. So all of the factor can be seen in the characteristic of the person, him or herself. You know, whether someone is married, whether someone is having children, whether someone is attending school, and so on. So that's the difference in the characteristic. And then the second one is difference in the impact of this characteristic. For example, the return to education on labor market outcomes for young women and men. So the impact of the characteristic, like for example, if this person is going to school, how is the impact of the schooling? How is the return to the education? Is the return positive, negative, or maybe not much? So that's the difference based on the impact. And then also the difference based on the characteristic. Okay, so this is the dynamic of the youth gender gap due to impact participation. Okay, you can see that. Okay, wait a minute. Most recent year and then 10 years before most recent year. Okay. So you can see here that in the x-axis is 10 years before most recent year, and the y-axis is most recent year. This is the countries, yeah. I think this is the countries. So there is a closing gap in terms of dynamic of the youth gender gap due to impacts of participation. And then meanwhile, the impact of the inactivity, it's also actually getting closer in those between countries, okay? Okay, let's get back here. And then it is shown that young women are more likely to be inactive than young men because of the difference in the impact of their individual characteristic rather than the level of those characteristics. Okay, young women are more likely to be inactive than young men because of the difference in the impact of their individual characteristic. You know, like for example, maybe when a young woman is getting married and then they might stop working to take care of the household. Okay, so because they stop working, then the participation rate from women in the labor market is going to decline. Okay, so things like that. Okay, so that's the gender gaps. And then the next one is coping with new technology. So there is an interesting evidence here. So despite the uncertainty about the impact of technology of the future work, so let me underline this for you. The impact of the technology is mostly uncertain. Okay, we don't really know. But nevertheless, current employment in emerging market and developing economies appear less vulnerable than in the advanced economies. So regarding the development of new technology, it seems like the employment in emerging market is less vulnerable than in the advanced economies. So as labor demand shift toward workers with skill complementary to new technology, the rest of the workforce is likely to suffer at least temporary loss. So when there is a technological shift, what's going to happen is people who have skill to utilize the technology, they will thrive. But those who cannot, they will experience loss, although it's only temporary loss. Yeah, you know why temporary loss? Because we have spillover factor. Yeah, eventually the skill or the technology or the method is going to be spill over, so that more people is going to be capable in adapting with new technology. It is crucial that young people in emerging market and developing economies be equipped with necessary skill. Now, to overcome the risk of having disadvantage because of new technology, it is important to equip young people with necessary skill. Like for example, maybe at least they must be able to operate computers or basic Microsoft Office, or maybe coding even, or whatever it is. Okay. And what's more, young and adult men tend to be employed less in countries more dependent on sector exposed to routinization. Okay. Okay, so this is one of the way to increase or to overcome youth unemployment is to encourage greater formality in the employment. Why? Because the evidence here show that if we can make most of the business they become formal business, then it will result in a better outcome for the youth, because youth they are most likely to be willing to work in the formal business instead of the informal one, which is understandable. Yeah, if you are in the informal business, then the benefit that you get, like for example, the healthcare, like the BPJS, it's not going to be there. And then also in terms of taxation, is going to be tricky if you are in the informal business. So that's why to encourage greater formality in the employment is going to encourage, it's going to have inverse impact in the youth unemployment. Okay, so here you can see the informality share of the employment in emerging market and developing economies. So this is the median for men, it's quite low, and then the median for women, this is the red one, and then the median for both is the black one here. So it seems like the informality share of the employment is quite high, yeah? Like 50, more than 50 in 2016, it's a little bit more than 50, yeah, in general, and in women, it's even higher. So if you can encourage more formality in business, you actually will help women more, yeah, because women is more likely to be hired in the informal business instead of the formal one, okay? And then this figure 9, estimated effects of formal employment on youth job satisfaction. Like I told you before, the youth, they prefer the formal business better than the informal business. So you can see overall, the blue one here, the youth stated here that they're going to be more satisfied if they are hired under formal employment. And this is for those youth who are in the high education. This is for the low education, okay? Okay, and then what other things that we can do to secure youth employment? That's managing aggregate demands, okay? So I have mentioned before that the youth employment is very sensitive. There is a high sensitivity in the youth employment in terms of the demand change, okay? So the youth unemployment in emerging market and developing economies is about twice as sensitive to demand condition as adults, highlighting the importance of prompt counter-cyclical policy. So I have mentioned before, right? If there is a change in demand, then the youth employment is going to change drastically. If the demand is going down for a small part, it's going to change significantly in the youth employment. Like for example, we have COVID-19 and then we have recession. Then those people who are going to be laid off first are the youth instead of the adult. Yeah, because typically the youth, they are still in the beginning of their career, and they, well, this is harsh, but they could be quote unquote more replaceable than their senior counterparts. So that's why they are the first people who are going to get laid off. So this situation is called for a counter-cyclical policy. So you know counter-cyclical policy, it means that when the economy is slow, then the policy is expanding. But when the economy is experiencing high inflation, then the policy is going to be contracting, okay? So counter-cyclical mean it has inverse relationship with the current cycle of the economy. Like for example, with the COVID-19, or we're having recession, then the government should execute the kind of policy that is expansion. Okay, like for example, giving social social transfer and then encouraging new project or things like that. Okay. The need for counter-cyclical demand policy will likely increase as emerging market and developing economies transform and labor market formality rises. One of the example of, when we do counter-cyclical policy, it will encourage more business to shift from the informal to formal, because like, for example, if we have recession, then the counter-cyclical is going to be pro-business policy. Maybe now we lower or we make it easier for people to apply their business to be formal. Okay, that's an example of counter-cyclical policy, pro-business policy. During a recession, then the counter-cyclical is going to be pro-business. Okay. Okay. So how can we improve youth labor market outcomes? Well, this is, like I said before, this is the role for structural policies. So taken together, the evidence suggests that a package of structural policy, increasing labor market flexibility, like I said before, and encouraging job formality could significantly benefit the youth and shrink the gender gaps while also improving adult outcomes. So the kind of policy that's going to encourage flexibility, encourage job formality, it's going to benefit the youth and shrink the gender gaps. It also is going to improve the adult employment outcomes. Okay. And then measures that enhance job market flexibility and provide buffers to individuals, such as less rigid job protection legislation alongside a stronger safety net, could complement more active labor market policy for youth. Okay, so if the job market, maybe it has a broader type of job, like for example, if now some of the job that used to make people go to office every day now is offered remotely. That's an example of more flexible job market. Then people probably will be more willing to apply, and then the hiring manager, they can also expand because it's going to be remote. Yeah, now it doesn't have to only hire people in the same area. Now they can go to other area as well, because it's going to be remote anyway, so it's fine. Okay, and then also buffers to the individuals. So buffers for the individuals is kind of like more benefit to the individuals that they hire. Like for example, job protection, and then also safety net, or maybe health insurance and things like that. Okay, but these policies must target well identified labor market deficiencies and be regularly assessed and improved iteratively. These policies, even though they are good in concept, we have to make sure that the target is well identified, and then we can understand the labor market better, so we can point out what is wrong with the labor market. Then the policy is going to work at its most optimum level. And then also the policy must be regularly assessed and improved iteratively. Okay. The exact mix of structural policies must be tailored to country-specific circumstances, including the economy's cyclical position and the extent of fiscal space, while taking into account most binding constraint on youth labor market performance in each countries. So basically, we cannot have a general policy. Yeah, it must be tailored to each country-specific circumstances. Okay. Okay. Before I continue to the next paper, Do you guys have any question regarding this youth unemployment problem? No question. Okay, I will continue. And then the next one, this is a paper by, let me check, I forgot the name of the writer. Where is it? This is a paper by David McKinsey. David McKinsey is a lead economist in, wait a minute. Where is it? Okay, David McKinsey is a lead economist in the development research group in World Bank. Yeah, so he and his colleagues made a paper that's going to evaluate the impact of vocation training. Okay, so how effective are active labor market policy in developing countries? A critical review of recent evidence. So what this paper does is it summarizes a lot of paper regarding the labor market policy, and then evaluate them, point out what work and what doesn't work, and then give a new suggestion in terms of labor market policy. Okay. So the summary of this paper is as follows. This paper critically examines recent evaluations of labor market policies. So recent evaluation of labor market policies that have provided vocational training. Specifically, the policy is vocational training. So a lot of labor policy intervention in emerging countries is training, providing training, providing more education. But until today, if we try to evaluate the impact of training, it's still, it seems like inconclusive. Yeah, wait a minute. Is my internet not stable? Let me check. I'm in the office now, so I use UGM's internet. I hope it's stable. Okay, continue. So yeah, vocational training. And other than vocational training, other type of policy is with subsidies, and then also job search assistance, and then assistance moving to argue that many active labor market policy are much less effective than policymakers typically assume. So this policy, the vocational training with subsidy and also job search assistance, it seems like the effect is less effective than what policymakers typically assume. Okay. Many of these evaluations find no significant impacts on either employment or earning. So the recent studies show that there is no significant impact between those policy on either employment or earning. One reason is that urban labor market appear to work reasonably well in many cases with fewer market failures that is often thought. And then as a result, there is less of a role of many traditional active labor market policies than is common practice. The review discussed example of job creation policies that do seem to overpromise and concludes with lesson for impact evaluation and policy in this area. Okay, basically we're going to take a look at several studies that analyze this policy, and then we will see why it works, why it doesn't work, and then what's going to be the suggestion from the writer. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about vocational training. Vocational training program were most common ALMP. This is the policy. I forgot what is the acronym of ALMP, but this is the policy used by government following the global financial crisis. So this type of policy of this vocational training with subsidies and then job search assistance, it all became popular since the global financial crisis in 2007, 2008. This is based on study by McKinsey and Robalino. And then the premise of such programs is that lack of certain technical skill is the reason. Okay, let me switch my color. So the reason why such program exists is because they think lack of certain technical skill is the reason that particular individuals are unemployed. So they think, the government think that, oh, so you are unemployed because you don't have computer skill. So here is training for computer. Oh, you cannot be hired because you don't know how to operate heavy machinery. So here is training to learn how to operate heavy machinery. So that's what the government think, yeah, and that these skills can be taught and learned in relatively short period. And the government think that those skills could be taught and learned in a relatively short period of time. In practice, these programs are typically used with two target groups of beneficiaries. The first one is general population, and the second one is at-risk youth population. What do we mean by at-risk? So at-risk here at-risk here are those young people who are they are in the they are in the working age, but economically vulnerable. So they are either not yet employed, or they are maybe employed but not secure employment. Like for example, quote unquote buruh harian. That's for example. So they are at risk youth population. Okay. So let's just jump to this table. So this table show the effect of vocational program, the impact of vocational program. So table 1 here. So we have several study in Turkey, Argentina, Colombia, Dominican Republic, India, and Kenya. Actually, there are other more studies, but I do not include it because it's already taking too much space. So I think we can leave those two studies behind. So this table 1 here, it summarized the result from 12 evaluation from 8 countries. So here you can see that the population that are targeted by this study are the general unemployed population and the low income youth, and then either unemployed general population or low income youth. And then this is the sample size. In Turkey, it's almost 6,000. Argentina 400, Colombia 4,000, Dominican Republic 1,500, and then 5,000. Oh, okay. Some of the study in Dominican Republic are quite a lot. And then in India, it's less than 700. In Kenya, it's 2,100. And then this is the attrition rate of those study. And this is the time frame of the intervention. Yeah, 1 year, 2.5, 18 months, 33 months, and so on. Now, this is the impact on the employment. This is the impact of the vocational training on employment. And you can see here, it's only 2% in Turkey. And then it's unknown in Argentina, and in Colombia, it's only 4.5%. In Dominican Republic, only 0.7%. And also negative 1.3%, negative 1.4%, 0.7%, 8.1% in India, and in Kenya, 5.6%. It's not very high, the impact of vocational training on employment. And then in terms of formal employment, it doesn't seem high either. Okay, most of them are less than, some are 4%, but the other are less than 3%. In terms of earning, in Turkey, it's almost 6%. In Colombia, it's 11%. In Dominican Republic, 10%, and here negative 1.9%. And then in India, oh, it's quite high, 95.7%. And then in Kenya, it's almost 30%. Okay, and this is the cost of the intervention. Yeah, it's actually quite expensive to do vocational training intervention, regardless where you do it. Okay, so let's discuss about this result. So the typical evaluation measure impacts 12 to 18 months after the conclusion of the training program by using the survey administered to the treatment and control groups. So the way they evaluate the intervention of vocational training is after the program is over, they're going to send survey to those people in the treatment and the control group. Well, there is a problem in this kind of evaluation method. The problem with this survey is attrition, yeah, of course. So there are people who are not willing to be surveyed after the program is over. So attrition is a problem. And then the second problem is the possibility that those in the treatment groups over-report their employment outcomes. So the self-report method here, it has probability to be misleading, yeah, either over-report or under-report. Okay, let's discuss more now. Oh, sorry. Okay, let's take a look at the table. So it seems like I forgot to put that in the slide, but anyway, other than the coefficient being quite small here in the impacts of employment and formal employment and also earnings, only, if I'm not mistaken, only 3 or 2 of this study has statistically significant result. Okay, so among these 12 study, only 3, if not 2, if I'm not mistaken, that has statistically significant result. So in other words, we can say that the result of the vocational training, it seems to be a little bit inconclusive, yeah, because we don't have very much result that is statistically significant. Okay. Okay, so what about the impact of vocational on gender? So it has been said that vocational training has bigger impact on women. You know, if you give training or some new technique or skill to women, it's going to be empower them, right? So they can get better job, they can build new business, and etc., etc. Now, however, many literature never formally test for a difference in impact by gender. And indeed, in their long-term follow-up, note that the magnitudes are similar for both men and women, but only statistically significant for women. So the impact of vocational training, is it true that it is bigger on women? Not necessarily, yeah, because not so many literature did formally test the difference of the impact between gender. And also, if we look at the long-term follow-up, the magnitudes of the impact between men and women in terms of the coefficient, it seems to be similar. Although for women, it tends to be more statistically significant. Okay, let's take a look at this table. This is the vocational training. This is the study that evaluates vocational training like we did before in Turkey, in Argentina, in Colombia, in Dominican, in Kenya, Malawi, and Peru. Now we can read the finding here. In Turkey, it cannot reject equality of impacts by gender. So it cannot reject the hypothesis of equality impacts by gender, and then impact only significant for male age 25 and older. Okay, and then in Argentina, impacts for men is statistically different from women, and impacts are only significant for men. Okay, let's take a look at, okay, randomly let's look at Kenya here. In Kenya, there is no significant long-run impact for either gender, and it does not test for equality by gender, and it finds significant impact for both men and women. So you can read the other by yourself, yeah. But the main idea here is the vocational training policy, they can be beneficial for both gender, men and women, but it does not necessarily mean that the impact is going to be bigger on women. Yeah, because most literature, they don't actually test the hypothesis in the difference between gender men and women. Okay. And then moreover, table 2 shows that all of the study that have formally tested for equality by gender can either not reject that impacts have been similar for men and women, or have found significantly higher impacts for men. So either the effect is the impact is actually similar, men and women, or it's significantly higher for men. Yeah. Therefore, it should not be assumed the training is generally more effective for women. Okay, so this is interesting. And then the other policy is search and matching assistant. So what is search and matching assistance? So you can see here the type of assistance that are given to the youth based on the study in Ethiopia, India, Jordan, Peru, Philippines, South Africa, and Uganda. So the type of assistance, search and matching, it's basically the main idea is we want to help young people to find job by giving them assistance. What kind of assistance? It could be transport subsidy, it could be certifying hard skill plus interview assistance, and also job fair, connecting to recruiters, certifying soft and hard skill, information about job vacancy, attending job fair, encourage to use reference letter, and certifying soft skill. So these are the kind of assistance that are being done in these countries. So this is the population, young job seeker, unemployed youth, and the youth job seeker, young woman unemployed, and blah, 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 and so on. Yeah, this is the sample size. Like what we did before, let's take a look at the attrition. So we can see that the attrition is quite high here in Ethiopia. Attrition 30% is high, yeah. And then 19% in Jordan, and then 70% in South Africa. So attrition still the problem here. If we can have very small attrition, that's great, but it doesn't seem to be happen here. And this is the time frame. Now let's take a look at the impact of those assistance on employment. We can see here the effect on employment seems to be only 4% in Ethiopia, 2%, and then almost 7% in this transport subsidy policy, and then negative 0.2% in job fair, and India it's less than 3%, Jordan less than 3%, Peru 6%, and negative 0.2%, and then in Philippines less than 3%, South Africa 2%, and then Uganda less than 6%. So again, we can see that the impact on the employment is not very high. And not every result in here is statistically significant, yeah. So it seems like the impact is not very high on the employment. Okay, on earning, I think it's the same case, yeah. And some study doesn't even have data on the impact on earnings. Okay. So if what we have seen is the weakness of the vocational training program, what do policymakers expect of such program, and what does result preference show? So the above discussion show that traditional active labor market programs have had at most modest impact on employment, and in most cases with typical intervention leading to only 2 percentage point increase in employment. That is that is usually not statistically significant. So it doesn't seem to be impactful. So why? Okay, and then the other evidence that we saw is the cost-benefit calculation usually rely heavily on the extrapolating statistically insignificant total earnings and gains over period well beyond a time frame of the study. So yeah, basically it's expensive, yeah. And in terms of cost benefit, it doesn't sound good either. So why this kind of policy is still quite popular? Well, the key answer to this is the mechanism. Okay, so let me read the next point. Economists are also not immune to this tendency to think active labor market programs will be more effective than they typically are. So why economists still like to do intervention in the labor market program and think that it's going to work? The answer is because of the ideal mechanism that we think about. Okay, so like what I mentioned in the beginning, because we assume that some people they don't get job because they don't have sufficient skill. So we think if we give them training in terms of that skill, it's going to help them to get job. Yeah, so that's the mechanism and the idealism that we think about. So that's why we tend to over exaggerate or overly confident in this kind of policy. Okay. A first statement to this comes from a number of studies covered in this review, being intervention designed by researchers themselves. So when we design an intervention, of course, we're going to focus in the mechanism, right? But it's in the idealism realm. In the real world, it might not work as good as we expect it to be. Okay, so that's why now we see that the evidence, it seems like those policy is not what we expect them to be. Okay, so what do we do now if it's not as expected? What types of alternative policy show promise? So this is what the author is going to share with us, the alternative policy that's going to have potentially work to overcome the youth unemployment. So given the continued pressure from the governments to be seen doing something to help people find jobs, this lack of empirical evidence for the effectiveness of many traditional programs is unlikely to be enough to cause them to be abandoned unless better alternative can be found instead. So while we do not have better alternatives to this policy, it seems like this policy is going to be still there. Okay, it's going to be still implemented, but we might. What might these alternatives be? So, what are the alternatives are going to be? So, one set of alternative policy is to move away from intervention on the labor supply side. So when we do intervention in terms of vocational training, we're going to do the intervention on the labor supply side. So in those people who are looking for employment, right? Now, the alternative, instead of we do the intervention in the labor supply side, we can focus more on the policy to help firms overcome the obstacle they face in innovating. Now, instead of in the labor supply side, why don't we quote unquote meddle in the labor demand side? Maybe if we help the firms to overcome obstacles they face in innovating and growing, they will be able to create more jobs and hire more people. Okay. A related approach is to help firms overcome onerous regulations and labor laws that limit firms hiring and growing. So like I have mentioned before, if the government policy could be a little bit more pro-business in terms of regulation and labor laws, then it's going to help the firms growing and hiring more people. On the labor supply side, the most promising intervention appear to be ones that help workers access different labor markets, as well as overcome sectoral and spatial mismatch. So if we are going to quote unquote meddle in the demand side, it doesn't mean that we just leave the supply side alone. No, we can still do intervention in the supply side, but more focus on helping workers access different labor markets, as well as overcome sectoral and spatial mismatch. So how the markets, labor markets in different sector or different types could be accessed by those people who are looking for a job, and also overcoming spatial mismatch. Okay. Okay, so these are the concluding lesson for impact evaluation. In terms of impact evaluation, there are some points that the author is going to tell us here. The first one, if we want to do impact evaluation in this kind of intervention, there are something we should pay attention to. The first one is, given the likely effect size of active labor market intervention, sample size may need to be a lot larger, and then measuring the impact over longer time frames, and then limiting attrition, and then continued and improve careful measurement of cost, and then pre-specifying outcomes and heterogeneity, and then testing placebo effects, and then understanding general equilibrium better. Okay. So that's it for the topics in our discussion. If you have any question or any comment, please. You don't have question. Okay. If you don't have a question, that's it, yeah, for today, for the youth unemployment problems. With Pak Gilang this Friday, I think you're going to discuss about tobacco economy, yeah. And then please take care of your presentation. I will give you the guideline. After this, I will upload it to Semester, and then prepare well to present it on Tuesday, November 13th, next week. Okay, on Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. Like we do today. Okay, I guess that's it for me. That's it from me. Thank you for coming. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye. See you next week.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, miss.
Thank you, miss.